Hello and welcome. We are almost there. 2025 has been another roller coaster, highs, lows, and plenty for me and my pal to talk about from week to week. When we thought things were quiet, it just got noisy. A quick word from our sponsor. The Scotland Rugby News podcast is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com just after us and upload your CV tonight. There are thousands of jobs all across Scotland, and you can find the one for you to kick off 2026 at S1 Jobs. So go on, get started. Gavin, I'm before I introduce you, I have a confession to make. And in some ways, I'm going to end the year with my head hanging in shame, because a regular contributor to this podcast, the wonderful Cammy Little from Moffat, we name check him often. I've name checked his sausage rolls often, and he said he would bring some for us, you and I, to the 1872. I got a message from him to say the bus has arrived. I'm sitting in West 5. I'm on the end of the row. Come and see me. I've got your sausage rolls. Before I got there, you and I had a wee chat, and you handed me a bag with 2 sausage rolls in it, and you said, Cammy says they're for us. I thought, brilliant. But I have to confess, Gavin, I went to see Cammy during the second half, and he handed me a bag with 2 sausage rolls in it. I said, but Gav's already given me one. He said, no, they were for Gav. These are for you. I went, well, do tell Gav, but I'm going to keep all 4 of them. So, Gav, I've had 2 days of little sausage rolls for my lunch. And I would like to say I feel bad, but I just feel magic, because they are the finest sausage rolls.
And do you know what? Do you know, as much as it pains me that I had them in my possession and I've given them away, I'm sure there's somebody watching this saying, Gav, you're not needing any more sausage rolls, pal. So you've probably done me a favour.
Oh, you're such a sweetheart. So thank you to Cammy for brightening up my 1872 a couple of little sausage rolls. It went down very, very well. Gav, good to see you. It's been quite a year. Before we get into some of the detail, so end of year report. What do you reckon for Scottish rugby in general? National team, women, age groups, Edinburgh, Glasgow, overall?
Overall, I think, to be honest, I think pretty disappointing. I take out Glasgow and sort of the success of the Women's World Cup, reaching the quarter-final. And I think, again, it's been pretty tough. Six Nations wasn't that great. Things obviously haven't improved on a men's national team front massively since then. Edinburgh, I think, as we saw at the weekend, remain a huge struggle. There's kind of green shoots from the 20s, but you still wonder where that the sort of long term is in their process. And then, yeah, as I say, Glasgow have done pretty well. There's been good stuff in the the results from Scotland women have been largely decent, but you look at that, the backdrop of it all was the contract and all the uncertainty, and Brian Eason, stepping down before he was essentially pushed to go. Look, I think that's not a great picture. So yeah, I think there's a lot of areas for improvement, was the way I would put it.
It's not been a classic. I think your mention of the women in the World Cup, probably the only squad that actually achieved their potential.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think before it, and we said it on here loads of times, getting to the quarterfinal represents a tick in the box, a success. I think we said before the World Cup, Scotland women were there in 2022 in New Zealand, but probably actually qualifying was the success of that for that squad. And they sort of went, and even by their own admission, they kind of made up the numbers. They were kind of pleased to be there. I thought this time they competed well. I thought they gave Canada, a decent game. They were obviously blown away by England in the end. And I think, if you'd asked anybody before the tournament, that's what we would all have probably expected. I think part of the frustration will be they were on that side of the draw, because in the other half of the draw, a semi-final might have been a possibility. But you run into England and there's only unfortunately one winner.
Yeah, for in every aspect.
Yeah.
Let's start then. Let's start with Scotland women. Rewind the tape all the way back. Going into the Six Nations, we were concerned because the number of injuries to some really key players. And the exciting thing about the Women's Six Nations is, other than England, it feels like there is actually an opportunity for everybody to beat everybody. And Scotland, while we'd love to beat Italy, it's probably a bit of that local bias and ignorance towards what the potential is. But to beat Wales and Ireland, especially knowing that we're going to play Wales in the World Cup, that was a big deal. All in the game. That's kind of where I'm going. Finishing fifth was a disappointment.
Yeah.
I don't disagree, but to get the 2 wins against Wales and Ireland gave a massive lift for the World Cup. And then if you remember when we were talking about the warm-up games to the World Cup, we were a little bit twitchy. And we were a little bit twitchy about some of the experienced players. So I get what you mean, but I think the big picture was the World Cup and the Six Nations, and I don't want to undermine the Six Nations, but the Six Nations was part of the pathway to the World Cup, and they got to the World Cup, other than what happened at Tighthead, really with the squad they would want to get to the World Cup with, I think, is my long-winded analysis of the women's game. But you were right that it feels like with a lot of what's happened in the game this year, for every positive that we experienced, it felt like we were just waiting to get tripped up from behind, as we felt like we were just pulling away. And the Women's World Cup had that thing hanging over it of, we knew Brian and his coaching team were finishing. Matt Banahan left early. There was a feeling of what's going to happen for the players, and I think the players have only just in the last couple of weeks began to see what the road ahead is. Maybe not the road ahead, but who's going to be driving the bus at least. But there's still some seats to be filled there. So yeah, I think as I reflect back on the women, total personal view here, it was a successful year, a year like no other. I'm worried about 2026 building on 2025, but maybe we'll just have to wait and see what 2026 brings.
Yeah, look, I think that's completely fair. I think I would be more optimistic about 2026 had there been more of a core of the World Cup squad being given contracts. I think, and that's, that again comes back to the big issue. We can talk about the results of 2025, but if we're going to look forward, they almost become an irrelevance, because you say, okay, that was that squad. Now can we look at who's got contracts, who's likely to be available for Sione Fukafuka in 2026? And actually, it's a very, very different group. I admire Scottish Rugby for handing the women the chance to play at Murrayfield. I hope what they've not done is given with one hand and said, go and play at Murrayfield, and with the other hand taken away by saying, but you'll do it with a squad that's mixed up of players who are internationals and who are just coming through with a view to playing at 2029 World Cup. Because if you take, we've both been at some England games where the results have been sore ones, and they've been, Scotland's best team. I think almost without any doubt, this is not going to be the best 15 Scotland players at the minute, but it might be the best Scotland player 15 that play at 2029, and they stay together for the next 2 or 3 years.
That's the difficult thing, though, isn't it? It's the being able to take some sore ones now with the hope it's going to be better. But
yeah,
then if
and
it doesn't
that's
get better, then you reflect back on it all and say, well, hindsight, the greatest gift given any rugby supporter. But when you think of the transition of this squad, there are players who you thought were going to become this next level who have been involved. Evie Wills, Eva Donaldson, two names who have not necessarily been in the first choice 15, certainly, but in the 23. Is it their time to step in? But it feels like we're going straight from Jade and Bonds and Lisa Thompson and who straight to more younger players who haven't had those experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Is that we've almost through the way the contracts have been worked, you've almost taken out a layer of experience where it would have softened the blow somewhat of losing a Jade Conkle, for example, where you would have had an Eva Donaldson who could have, I know she's not number 8, but somebody who could have stepped in, has played in a few Six Nations, has been to a World Cup, has experience of playing Test match rugby. Now, what Scottish Rugby have chosen is to say, okay, we're actually going to rip off the band-aid and we're going to throw people into this who've no experience of that level. And it might be, I suppose, in some way, and this is where my fear comes, because the only example of that I can think of is it's like probably the first year of Razzie in the box, which went not that great. And it's like what Steve Tandy's having to do with Wales, which hasn't gone that great. But Scottish Rugby are doing this through choice. These other countries have had that sort of inflicted on them by poor management of depth and all that kind of stuff. Scottish Rugby are choosing to go down this route. So I think you almost are saying to Sione Fukufuka, actually, I'm sure we'll talk about Alex Williamson's quote about Gregor with winning. It's not about winning and losing. I think that applies to the women's coach this year, because this has got to be about finding a squad that you can work with, and then finding the balance of the here and now, but also getting ready for the next World Cup and making sure that actually enough players have got the requisite experience to be ready for the next World Cup. Just on the games back, Evie Gallagher and their incredible backline should have higher expectations coming off the World Cup. I think that might be some people's view, and I can see that as, because they've shown such potential and so many of those players still will be there. I think it's what's around Evie, the backline. Have you got the required experience? You mentioned tight head is one area, the front five in general. And then I suppose, because we've not done any sort of women's stuff for a while, but the injuries. You've seen in the last few weeks the number of posts that are on social media from players that are experienced players saying, I've just had this operation, or I've just had, and that becomes a concern. And I know there's a longer time to the Women's Six Nations, but all of a sudden you think, well, actually, with the way the contracting's gone, with the way that group's going to look, you need Emma Wassell, Lisa Thompson, Sarah Bonner, and all the others, Lana Skeldon, etc. You need them all fit, because around that you're going to have a lot of youngsters.
That's my concern. Evie Gallagher, if the Lions were going now, Evie Gallagher gets to go because she's been incredible. My concern is, as a number 8 going backwards or having are they going to be given the platform to show themselves? That backline, Fran McGee is somebody that everyone's excited about. Is she going to be given the platform to perform? And I do worry about the game at Murrayfield. While I think it's going to be an event and a lot of people will want to be there, a weekend in Edinburgh for a lot of England supporters will be very attractive. being at Murrayfield as the first one, there will be a lot of people who want to be able to say, I was there when Scotland played England at Murrayfield. I was part of that record-breaking crowd for a women's sporting event in Scotland. There's a lot in it. I just worry that it's not the best Scottish squad that's available, and it's being played in front of the biggest audience that there's ever been. That's my concern as an all-around thing for development of the women's game and women's sport. It has to be a positive. So, and I'll be there. I look forward to it. The games I went to in the Women's World Cup were so enjoyable, amazing spectacles, amazing events. I still believe that the players understand their role in growing the game. The time and energy they give to spectators is second to none. I've never seen anything like it.
Yep.
And I don't know how long they can sustain that for, but I think they still understand that for the next little while, that's what's needed, because that's what a lot of people are going for, is for that engagement. And they are one of my pet hates that I would love to see disappear from 2025 is this growing the game and reaching new audiences nonsense that gets peddled out all the time. But I think they are reaching a new audience, an untapped audience that is enjoying the spectacle, enjoying the game, the event, and getting involved and growing that. So long may that continue. And it was great for Edinburgh and Glasgow to get their shows on the road. You know, they've played, but to then get to play on Saturday, unfortunately I wasn't able to see any of it other than the clips that I've seen. Good to see the number of people that were there. Potentially at a different kickoff time there might have been more, the 38,000 people that were watching the men's game. Maybe some of them would have been able to go to that. You know, I would have been one of those spectators. I'll get to see a game at some point this season, but good to see this attraction that's been getting on social media and the media.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think if more people had been able to get into the game at the Hive, which by all accounts was a decent contest, they could have all nipped over the road, gone into Murrayfield, and for the next 2.5 hours had a nap.
I wondered where you were going. So let's look back to men's Six Nations. One of those where I think 2024 Six Nations, I was expecting big things. I had real enthusiasm for it. This year I was the complete opposite, and I was really concerned. And I don't know where it landed. I don't think it was as bad as maybe I thought it was going to be. But you know, that Wales team is as poor a Wales team as, I think, not in my lifetime, that's not actually true, but certainly for recent history, that's the poorest Welsh squad there's been. Italy, I think, we're probably a bit disappointed, and we just don't seem to be able to get over this Irish hurdle. France are going well. England, you know, I don't know what to expect this year, but Six Nations, I think, largely disappointing. Yeah,
really disappointing. I think, you know, if you go through it, Scotland started against Italy at home, comfortable, 31-19. You think, okay, we're off. Always talk about getting off to a good start and a bonus point win first game of the championship was important. Then Ireland, and the same old nonsense. Just never got off the bus. And again, and I know that we've got Ireland at the next World Cup, and I know Gregor's spoken about this desire to beat Ireland before the 27 World Cup. Like, where does that come from? It's at this point, it's blind faith, because Scotland have never shown anything to suggest they're even anywhere remotely closer to Ireland. And this is an Ireland team that in their press is being picked apart for being old and past it and dad's army and all that stuff. And I still think they could pick 42-year-old Bundy Aki and 40-year-old, I know he's retired, 40-year-old Peter O'Mahony, and they would find a way to beat Scotland. And that's the big one. I know that game.
I'm glad you used that phrase. That phrase you've used of finding a way. That to me is the difference. That there's a few teams. I think England are developing that. They're developing the we know what we need to do to win. The crowd might not particularly enjoy what it is, and Ireland just, especially with Scotland, and I don't know what it is. I actually spoke to a former Irish international who said there's been a bit of disquiet in Ireland about the way Scotland have spoken about themselves and golden generation, and there's a little edge of we'll put them in their box and this sort of noisy neighbours. A lot of people believe that there's this romantic relationship between Scotland, Ireland and Wales. But actually, it sounds to me like there's quite a bit of niggle between Ireland and Scotland.
Yeah, and I think, you look back to the last World Cup and Blair Kinghorn said in Paris, we will beat them. And, well, that went well. It was 33-0 at one point. So, like, I to be honest, I don't blame him. I think if it was a rivalry like England where Scotland kind of showed for a few years that they did have the better of them, or it was at least a contest. But I always think back to the game that sort of summed it up for me wasn't either the World Cup drubbins, but do you remember the game 24 Six Nations at Murrayfield? Is that right? 23?
Mm-hmm.
And Ireland had both hookers go off. Cian Healy packed down at hooker and Josh van der Fleer chuck in at the line out. Scotland never lay a glove on them. And it's as you say, it's that finding a way. They just adapt to whatever situation. After that Scotland defeat in the Six Nations, we saw, but we lost Darcy and Finn to one clash of heads, which was a sort of freak injury. Mm-hmm. Yes, but other good teams find ways to deal with situations like that. Scotland aren't at that level yet. And I think as we go through the Six Nations, you see that. Lost to England. Well, I mean...
And should have won. I thought we were going to win. I'm sitting, the first time I've been to Calcutta Cup at Twickenham, the crowd were quiet. I was like the rose among thorns, the thistle among...
roses.
Pricks, I don't know. Like it got really quiet, and I was deliberately noising up the people around because it was like, here we go. And so many of them came up to me after and went, yeah, you should have won that. You should have won that. Like nobody was having a crack at me. It was like proper, yeah, you should have won. And
yeah, exactly.
I walked back to the cabbage patch just feeling really flat. But so were the England. Nobody really rejoiced that day. It was a weird thing. I've been involved in some strange atmospheres in 2025.
Yes. I hope we've got Lewis. The sort of common denominator of all that is not you.
Well, my wife does say that I'm flypaper for silly billies.
But that game sums Scotland up. They play some great stuff when Scotland are on. They're really good, but this failure to put teams away when there are opportunities comes back to bite them at some stage.
There's quite a few England supporters will say they like the way we play.
Oh yeah,
but they would always take a win over the way that we play. Like
and actually, and you talked about England a few minutes ago, and that game shows their ability to find a way, because they said, do you know what, actually, we're not as flashy as Scotland, so we're going to go up the guts of them, we're going to out-scrummage them, and we'll rely on a huge pack to get us on the front foot, and when we get penalties, we'll kick the points.
I can't remember who the English pundit know-it-all is, but they were having a crack at Steve Borthwick for ruining Finn Smith, who's a generational talent. But to me, I actually really admire Steve Borthwick because No, I need the players that fit my thing.
Yeah.
Like that. And George Ford, I was chatting to Matt Scott about George Ford, who played with him, and he said you didn't want to get stuck in a lift with the guy, but he's a phenomenal rugby player and trainer and brain, and you've got him. Marcus Smith, I think, is finding Quinn's difficult because he's not George Ford, and Quinn's kind of need him to be less Marcus Smith and more George Ford. And I kind of feel for Marcus Smith because that's not who he is, and he's getting pelters for people. But the thing that excites us about Marcus Smith is being Marcus Smith. But it feels like Quinn's need him to be somebody else, and that's not who he is. Finn Smith, the Lions didn't quite work, and it doesn't seem like England is quite working for him either. But I'm really interested to see what England deliver and Steve Borthwick delivers. I spoke to a very well-respected man who knows much more about rugby than I do, and he was speaking pretty positively about the Six Nations and that age-old, we've got England and France at home, and that's always the best draw. I'm not quite sure it matters as much now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think all in the game's comment about George Ford making a great coach is 100% on.
I think he already is, though. That's the brilliant thing about him, that he doesn't court anything.
No.
He one of the things we've not mentioned is that ridiculous Six Nations documentary that was out, the second one that came out before the Six Nations this year, that was just painful. But George Ford looked like he hated every second of that.
Do you know I thought that was the worst thing I had watched in 2025? Until I left Murrayfield on Saturday night.
That was, I don't think anybody enjoyed Saturday. I think this, looking, but you look back to look forward. I hope that Six Nations, I hope we're looking at as we needed to go through that to get to what we're going to get to this Six Nations. But I am concerned because Mr. Dupont looks like he's back and enjoying himself. Talking about talented backlines, I mean, that French backline, those players just look like they're getting better and better and better. And the standard of that some of those games in the top 14 are just outrageous. They're so physical up front, and then every now and then a game of basketball breaks out and a try is scored from behind your own try line with unbelievable pace and handling, and players just looking like they absolutely love what they're doing. But then when they need to, they can kick the leather off it and they can defend. And I worry about France. England, I think Borthwick's getting them into a place where they're going to know how to beat Scotland, how to beat France, how to beat. I worry about the England progress moving forward. Ireland are Ireland. I don't think Wales can be as bad as they've been. And Rhys Zammit looks like he's loving Bristol Bears. He's having a whole heap of fun at Bristol Bears. And then Italy just keep getting better.
Yeah, and look, we've said this before, but I do think some of the games at home advantage maybe makes a bit of a difference. Italy's one of them. I think the idea of going to Rome makes it significantly tougher than having them at Murrayfield. And look, as we've just said, we won that opening game this year and still had a disappointing campaign. If you get off to a bad start, you're up against it straight away. And from what's happened after the Six Nations summer tour was obviously a massive disappointment from a Scotland point of view. Lost that important game at Fiji, surrounded it by two completely meaningless wins against Samoa and an on-cap game against the Maori. Then, not to rehash people's bad memories about the autumn, but, it is what it is. The two big games didn't go Scotland's way, and coulda, woulda, shoulda again against the All Blacks, and Argentina was as bad as it gets for 50 minutes.
I wrote a post on social media the other day about watching the 1990 Grudge documentary, and I looked at the 1990 fixtures for Scotland, which was obviously a Five Nations rather than a Six Nations. So they played one game less in that window. They then went on tour in the summer to New Zealand and played a proper tour where they had midweek games and provincial games and two capped internationals against the All Blacks. One that was very close and one that was a defeat. And then they played one test in the autumn where they gave Argentina a bit of hiding. And I remember going to autumn tests where I think they played Zimbabwe one year I went, and I think maybe Romania one year I went, because it wasn't a thing. And they played against probably tier 2 countries or whatever. I don't know if they were called that in those days, but they played fewer games, but there was so much to learn from them. There wasn't world rankings. There was, it was a completely different landscape. But Scotland have played a lot of international games this year.
Yeah.
And some of them, obviously, every game in the Six Nations you tend to get excited about because of the competition and the history and everything that goes with it. The summer tour was far away. The timing of the kickoffs, the Lions tour was on at the same time. It didn't, and then to play America in the autumn with the flipping window. You play the All Blacks, Argentina, and then you play Tonga in another game that felt it didn't feel special. Is maybe my polite way of putting it, but it's a lot of games without actually feeling like some of them. For rugby, I know financially they're needed, and people keep hammering me on social media when I say things like, "Oh, how else are you going to pay for it?" I get all that. I understand that, but rugby and enjoyment and development. I would rather we played more A fixtures and more provincial fixtures, and we did a shadow Six Nations, and I would rather we did more things like that to give players a chance than play against America. I'd rather play America, Australia, the All Blacks, Argentina, and Georgia in the autumn.
So tell me this: like Scotland, what do you learn from playing a game where you win 85-0? You've got a new defence coach, but the opposition have got so little of the ball that your defence system's not tested once. I just don't get it. And why not play that game against Georgia, Japan? No, Japan aren't now what they were 10 years ago at the World Cup or at their own World Cup. Like, why is it, and my frustration is always, why is it always Scotland? We bolted on that game, the Samoa game, to the summer tour, so there was a third game. But okay, great, but very nice Scotland, but we've lost the one that mattered. The autumn, we've had two games really that were important. We've had two games that, as I've said before, you and I probably could have played in and Scotland would have won. Like, I don't get it. I don't, and it's.
So I think some of it though is time on task. If you ask any coach from Gregor Townsend to Rhodri at Haddington, the thing they want is more time. It doesn't matter who you are, you want more time, and that's it. And because Scotland has so many players within their responsibility, they can have them outside that window, and they can have time on task, and they can try and develop them. But as the spectacles, I totally agree. It's really, really tough. What have we learned? Like the players that played in that America game, have you really learned much about them?
I mean, we've learned
more about them playing against each other in a more of a.
We've appeared to have lost your mic there, Bruce. That was all very strange. You were waving your hands about and making probably quite a good point, but your mic appears to have completely disappeared from us. A small technical hitch, folks. Bear with us till we sort this out.
You got me now? You hear me?
You appear to be back.
Apologies, something wrong with my mic. I find it difficult knowing what have we learned from those things, and I would rather we almost played against each other in units, in combinations, but then look what we saw on Saturday. When you know each other and it's too familiar, it's very difficult. I'm a huge advocate for A fixtures or B fixtures or whatever you want to call them. I would far rather that was where people were tried and tested before they made the step up. And I think we might be getting closer to that coming back with things like emerging Scotland and all, and Chile and an A international. I think we might be getting closer to that. I would enjoy supporting that. Paying a tenner to go to the Hive or Scotstoun or McDermott Park or wherever it is to watch an A fixture. I
would enjoy that if it was a tenner, but I think that notion might be slightly on the fanciful side. I think there is. Look, I'm all in favour of the A fixtures as well. I think where there becomes a balance is, we've talked about caps and stuff before. It feels like we've kind of handed out a whole load of caps, and I think offline, you and I have discussed in the past, is somebody going to come along in a few years' time and say, actually, this game against USA, outside of an international window, when they were robbed of all their best players, and yes, I know so were Scotland, but is that a fair fight? Is that worthy of being a test match? I'm not convinced. Should we move on?
I'm not just last point on fixtures. I'm not a lover of the Nations Cup and what's coming, but what I do hope that is a move closer towards is a more organised calendar.
Yeah, I agree. I agree on both fronts. I think I'm not a fan of it because it ring fences the tier 1 teams. I don't necessarily think that. Look, Argentina have benefited massively from playing the traditional tri-nations every year as part of the Rugby Championship. They've beaten the All Blacks, and part of that is the familiarity. Does that make Scotland's chances of beating the All Blacks higher because we'll play them more often? Possibly. Does it detract from the lure of the All Blacks coming to Murrayfield? Definitely. And I think you're talking about games that are special, because they're only once every 2 or 3 years, once every 4 years. The All Blacks feels special. It feels like a big deal when South Africa or New Zealand roll into Murrayfield and there's the haka and there's, Scottish Rugby put up a show on that they probably don't for other games. If that happens more regularly, you probably do lose a bit of that mystique about the fixture. But I think what we would all give to be there the day that Scotland beat the All Blacks for the first time, and that's one, again, I talked about the Ireland thing earlier. We don't feel any closer to beating Ireland or to beating South Africa. Scotland feel closer now to beating New Zealand than they have done for a while, and they should have done it by now.
Yeah, I think is that because we're getting better, or is because that's what's happening to them? That's for another day.
Yeah, exactly.
Scotsman on the Lions tour. I think possibly the unluckiest Man of the Year award goes to Xander Fagerson. I think not luckiest, but great to have John Dalziel on the Lions coaching team.
Yep.
I think that probably took a lot of us by surprise. Hopefully no disrespect to JD, but that was a massive feather in his cap, and I think a great thing for Scottish Rugby that John got to go. But Xander, I think heart broke for Xander. I think everybody, not just in Scotland, I think everybody was gutted that Xander didn't get to go on that.
Yeah, and he was somebody who probably from 2021, was saying himself, and people were saying, do you know what? He's gone on that first tour. He was behind. He was a clear third choice in 21. I think he might not accept that, but that's probably, I think, a fair assumption of where his game was, where he was in his sort of journey. I think this year it looked open. It could have been a test starter. I think he almost certainly would have been part of the test 23 at some point. And to be struck down with now what turns out to be two separate injuries was just brutal luck for him. I think you can see the way he's come back that he looks like he's kind of making up for lost time. I've been really impressed with Xander since he's returned. He kind of looks like he's never been away. But yeah, look, for all that we were delighted to see all the guys, I think 8 named initially and then another 4 or 5 flown out. You did think, like every turn I was saying, and poor Xander is sort of forced to watch all this or to miss out and hear about it all from his good mate Scott Cummings and all the other boys that were there. But I mean, to have a dozen Scots on the Lions tour was amazing.
Yeah, it was like being back in the 80s. Do you know who I think appears to have benefited the most from it is Ewan Ashman? The way he has come back, I think he's been a standout for Edinburgh. He was sorely missed at the weekend, but at the level of involvement in the game, I think, has gone up. Edinburgh actually have a selection of really niggly, annoying hookers.
Yeah.
Jerry Blythe Lafferty will pride himself on being an absolute nuisance. Harry Morris is a pest. Paddy's an absolute, if you speak to boys at Edinburgh, they'll say Paddy Harrison at training is really, really annoying. And, Ewan Ashman is the top of that pile. So I think he's been excellent. I think in a 2025 highlight and then complete low light, Darcy getting selected got everybody excited. Darcy scoring a try had, I think, the whole of Scotland almost in tears, and then 2 minutes later, like, heart just broke. When I saw him coming off, I was absolutely gutted. But he's able to say he's a try-scoring Lion, and I don't know if he'll get another chance, but, to go from the absolute peak of probably your rugby playing career to that was really, really tough.
Yeah, it was tough. And I think to go back a wee bit further, take that back, when the squad was announced and Duhan was in and Darcy wasn't, given that Duhan had been injured just before the squad was picked, there was a lot of sort of raised eyebrows, I would say. I watched the announcement at
and when you have the social media teams, the cameras trained on players, it's like, oh no.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully Edinburgh allowed all their guys to go home and watch it. But I do think for all the videos we've seen of Pierre Schumann and Blair Kinghorn and all these guys celebrating with their families.
Blair weighs top off though. Come on.
I mean that was outrageous. That was. But to be fair, if I looked like Blair Kinghorn, I think I'd have my shirt off. But I do think as well those videos exist where a player realises, for in Darcy's case, Mac Hansen's name comes out and he does the quick alphabet in his head, realises G's missed and thinks, right, stop that video and delete that from my phone forever, and that's so then to have the disappointment of not being picked initially, to then go back into Edinburgh training, see his mate who has got a place. Darcy then scores a hat-trick in the last game of the season against Ulster, then goes on the Scotland tour with presumably half a word of, if you stay fit, we'll need reinforcements at some point, so you might get a shout. He then gets sent off playing against Fiji, and he's probably at that point thinking, "Oh well, I've totally missed my chance here." The red card is deemed sufficient. There's no ban. Then 48 hours later, he's in Australia, and then, as you say, he plays, scores a try. Everyone, the world's at his feet, and the back three hadn't looked like a position the Lions had sort of nailed down. Nobody really sort of took their chance. And you're saying, well, actually, all of a sudden, I know it's one game, but if Darcy has a blinder here, you never know. And then he gets hurt. And yeah, as you say, he was in tears. There's a great picture of Finn consoling him. And yeah, I think there would have been a few folk in Hoyk needing an arm around him at that point, because I think we were all gutted for him.
I think we got really excited about Finn, Sione, and Shuggy as well. Like that was something to get genuinely excited about. Hang on, could Scotland have 10, 12, 13 in the test here? This is getting excited. And then, the games were going well. I'm gutted for Finn in a way that, he's now a test winning fly half. It was his Lions team, but to lose that last test, and this is the poorest Wallabies team there's been for years, and it's going to be a whitewash, and then not to do it is slightly disappointing. I'm absolutely being greedy here, but I was really for Finn, and I don't really know Finn, but what I do know, I like, and I like that we had a Scotsman wearing 10 and being first choice for the Lions, but to not win that third one, I was gutted, but I was so pleased that he got that series win. He's able to say, well, not that he needs to say it, but probably we as Finn fans are able to say, best fly half in the British and Irish, selection. It was absolutely his team. Seems like him and Andy Farrell had it sorted. And I was delighted for Sione and Shuggy, because they seemed to give it a whole load.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Sione got the first try for Scott since Alan Tate in '97. Hugh got a bit lucky, but you need a wee bit of luck in these instances. And we should say again, and we said it at the time, fair play to Gary Ringrose for flagging up that he had that concussion before, I think, the second test. Like that takes, to take yourself out of Lions test team shows how far the players' knowledge and acceptance of concussion has come. I think probably only a few tours ago, you wouldn't have had that level of honesty from a player saying, actually, this might never come my way, but I recognise my health's more important. So fair play to Gary Ringrose for that. But Hugh Jones, I think, had a good tour and has had a great year. I think Finn, I mean, to be honest, I was surprised Finn wasn't on the World Rugby's Player of the Year award. I thought was. I mean, I know there's a short.
It's tough though when your national team hasn't necessarily, that's how I've felt about the Lions over that Scotland as a team hadn't really given its players the sort of platform to say, look, I am as good, if not better, than the players in the other teams. It was no surprise that when Wales were flying, the squad was made up mostly of Welsh, and the Welsh coach, because they were flying, was the coach. Ireland are flying, the squad is mainly made up Irish. It's an Irish coach. To have as many Scots in this squad, I think, is because, and there will be people in here that will jump on me for this, but in the time that Gregor has been there, players have been able to show themselves as being as good, if not better, than other players in the British and Irish pool.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you look at, our Scotland's improvements, if you can call it that, or the certainly the increase in the level has coincided with Wales being as bad as they've been. So I think there's partly that. Scotland are probably that third pick now behind England and Ireland, but I was pleased to see all the guys that went on the tour. I think a lot of them look like they've sort of kicked on. I think some players you can see, like Sione, for example, that fueled his whole last season. The idea that he would go back to Australia with the Lions, and there maybe has been a wee bit of a lull in Sione's game. But as you say, somebody the comment earlier, Gregor Brown has learned a load from being in that environment for a couple of weeks.
Oh, completely.
You talked about Ewan Ashman. Pierre looks a different level of player than before this time last year. So there's loads of positives to take from that. I thought Ben White, for being a sort of call-up for an injury, I thought Ben White was the unluckiest guy there not to make the test team. I thought Jamison Gibson-Park was okay, but nowhere near the level that we've expected. I thought Alex Mitchell was nothing special. I think Ben White can feel pretty hard done by that. He didn't manage to kind of force his way in.
Yeah, I'd totally agree with that.
But no, look, I think having them had that experience, we'll see what it brings for the Six Nations. I would have liked to have seen it have more immediate impact in those games in the autumn. But I think the real proof of the pudding of how much that impact that's had will be when Scotland players go up against the players they played with on the Lions tour during the Six Nations.
I think Pierre, and Pierre outwardly is a very confident guy. I think he potentially has shown himself that he's up there. Like,
yeah,
he's got absolutely nothing to fear. He can have a crack. And when you speak to Scotland internationals who have been Lions of years gone by, they do get excited about the Six Nations after a Lions tour, because they feel like players do come back with a feeling of, actually, we're as good, if not better. And Jim Telfer used to fuel that when he was involved. So yes, I agree. I hope that's true. And, Ben White, I think you're right. And I think his level of confidence will have been increased with the Lions and potentially played a part in him sticking around in France, that actually this is where I'm going to be, and I can show myself to Scotland from here. I don't need to be at Edinburgh. Brown, I don't disagree with Sim 12 there. I think Brown has got a lot of potential. I just don't know where he fits. If I was picking Gregor's pack for the Six Nations, I don't know what it will be. I know it will be Pierre, Ewan Ashman, and Xander. I think it's still going to be Fagerson, Darge, and Dempsey. I think it will be Gilchrist and Cummings, but maybe I'm wrong in the second row. But 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. I'll be very surprised if there are changes there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's maybe the difference between those players. Flamont and Byrne are guaranteed starters. I think more and more, and actually we had a comment about this earlier, but more and more Scotland's versatile players become very handy options for the bench. And I apologise to Alan for not getting this, because he sent this in a wee while ago. But my answer to that is yes. I think Jamie Dobie is becoming he's got to be a guy who's in the team. And whether that means Ben White is on the bench, or whether it means, and I talked about this actually last week, we're now in a situation where we could be talking about Darcy and Doohan both missing out.
I don't think Gregor is leaving Ben White out.
Neither do I. And I wonder if that almost makes Dobie's job easier, because he now knows he's competing to start on the wing, because I think Ben White feels like he's a distance above George Horne and Dobie. But look, for me, the last couple of weeks in particular, and in games, let's be honest, in games that have been absolutely dreadful, Dobie's been the guy that I've gone, I'd pay to watch him.
He's class, and he's been class for a while, but this is, we've only got two teams, and and Jamie Dobie wants to play at scrum half. But if Gregor's saying to Jamie Dobie, by the way, you're going to be an international winger, he's not turning that dude.
Well, exactly.
And Kyle Steyn just seems to be getting better, and he's also a leader, and you don't really have that in many wingers. Blair Kinghorn at 15, you'd still imagine is. Tom Jordan's flying at number 10 with Bristol Bears and seems to be enjoying things there. Shuggy's still injured. Matt Curry's now back. It's going to be I think there are probably more question marks in the back line than there are in the pack for Gregor. The bench is probably where things get even more interesting, because does Jamie Dobie start in the wing and become the backup scrum half, which means you don't carry a scrum? Can Gregor go 7-1 on the bench?
There we go. There's the spoiler for 2026, is that Scotland could look at a 7-1 bench now. And I mean, it has to be a possibility, because
absolutely break my heart.
I know it would. And I do feel for you. I feel like the sort of ultimate Bruce breaker is not far away. A game outside the window with a
7-1 bench.
7-1 bench. It's in a Nations Championship for the Mickey Mouse Trophy.
You're possibly not far away. Right, we've kind of skirted around it for too long. We now get to Glasgow and Edinburgh. Let's where do we start, or do we take them as a pair?
Can we just start by addressing that both saved the worst till last at the weekend? I have watched some terrible performances this season, and I would say from both teams. Glasgow, that donut at the Scarlets a few weeks ago, that was a particularly tough watch. Things got better for them. They beat Sale. I thought they were good against Sale. They were brilliant in that second half against Toulouse, and I thought they were on top and they were dominant at Hampden. And then both teams had their Christmas dinners and hit the snooze button and forgot that there was 40,000 people inside Murrayfield who actually turned up to be entertained.
Right, I'm gonna bump my gums about this again, and this is another one I took pelters for, because I posted my idea that I've floated on here often, that I think the 1872 should be first game of the season, last game of the season. And there was folk coming, oh no, this is when it's shit, and I travel and all, like, I get all that. They're professionals, right? It's their job. I'm not saying they need to be away on Christmas Day, and none of them would need to be, but what can change in 6 days? Against the teams that you know better than anybody else. You know, a lot of international rugby is pretty dull because the analysis is so intense. They play against each other all the time. There's no hiding place. The players at Glasgow and Edinburgh, I was talking about this to somebody after the game, and they were talking to me about Jamie Dobie and Darcy, and I said, they spent Six Nations camp together, which is the best part of 10 weeks.
Yep.
They then went on Scotland tour together, which was the best part of 6 weeks. They spent the Autumn Nations together, which is the best part of 6 weeks. So actually, they've spent half a year together.
Yep.
And then they play against each other within the space of 6 days. What are we expecting? Like, they know each other inside out. The game plan. I think Glasgow had one line out where the ball went back inside, and I can't remember who it was to. And it was like, oh, that's quite exciting. But it was like there's the opportunity for a game of rugby to break out just wasn't really there. And it's not going to be with 6 days. What can you change in 6 days? You're and especially Edinburgh, who were patching players together because their injury list just got, and it's longer again from Saturday.
Yep, and we've talked before about this idea that, you know, after the Hampden game, Sean Everett said, well, Edinburgh need to address their attack. Well, okay, yeah, that might be the case, but you've got 2 training sessions to sort it, and you're playing a team that are who are defensively very, very good. So how much can you fix? I do quite like this. I think this maybe sums
Is
up.
there somebody having a pop at me?
No, this sort of sums
Oh.
up how I felt on Saturday. It was hard going in lots of fronts, but I
There
do
was a
think
lot of Glasgow fans having a crack at it being up.
yeah, I mean it was quiet,
Harsh.
and you know what?
But it's tough to get excited though. It's tough to get excited if what's having been a football fan for longer than I was a rugby fan, turning up and watching a 0-0. Going to Hampden and watching Scotland playing Lithuania on a Thursday night, it's hard to generate an atmosphere when what's on the pitch hasn't been exciting.
100%.
There was very few line breaks. It was the tries weren't from 40 yards out. It's tough to get excited. One Edinburgh fan had said they'd heard Glasgow folks shouting "We are Warriors," which is, and away fans quite often do generate an atmosphere. When Gloucester come up to the Hive, they bring an atmosphere. Ulster quite often bring an atmosphere to the Hive. It's also difficult when you're in the big bowl and there's a lot of empty seats. And people are kind of disconnected. And that was, I saw Franco saying he thought, I think he was chatting to you actually, saying that he thought Hampden was better than last year and there was 7,000 less folk. Now, I don't know if he's just playing a game there or what, but it's difficult to, we've both been at Murrayfield when, I remember when Scotland played the Scarlets on the weekend of the first Doddy Weir Cup outside the window, and every High-Hegian in Scottish rugby was in Cardiff, and I was announcing at the time. I pretty much announced the crowd because there was about 6 of us there.
Yeah, I remember that game.
I think it was one of the lowest crowds they'd ever had. It was a Friday night, Scarlets in the big bowl, and Scotland were playing Wales the next day for the first Doddy Cup.
That's right.
And trying to generate an atmosphere, you can have as many fireworks and music and whatever as you like, but it's difficult. And there's people who have found it difficult, and we're talking about reaching a new audience, but there was people who were old audience struggled with Saturday.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when the product is on the pitch is tough, you can have everything you want around the stadium, but when you don't actually have the stuff in between the white lines isn't very good, it makes it really, really tough.
Sometimes I wonder, and and you said we'll talk about this, and we've kind of skirted over it. Winning is important. Glasgow were gutted they didn't get a bonus point. They wanted to get a winning bonus point. They didn't get it. And I think Franco said that after the game. He was disappointed he didn't get 4 tries. He didn't. There wasn't really a huge number of comments about we didn't play that well. We didn't. They just wanted to win. It's professional. It wasn't about the 1872 Cup. The 1872 Cup was a side effect of winning 2 league games, which was what they wanted to do. The second game became about the 1872 Cup for Edinburgh because that meant they would win, and they would win with a 13-point difference. So it kind of became about the 1872 Cup. I think Edinburgh are sitting 11th in the URC table. Now, games in hand are only games in hand if you win them. So there's, it was just a bit gutting. I mean, I had a belting day. I saw heaps of folk. I had a laugh. I got my sausage rolls. I can't control what's on the pitch. Alan,
you got more than your own sausage rolls too. Great.
The attacking shape and the game plan. It's challenging. The game. I don't know what it is. The players can. I think. Who did you have? Was it Magnus after the game saying, we need to be better and we need, like the players have quite often taken the rap for it. Glenn Young after the game at Hampden was saying, we've got to be better at this. We've got to execute this. So there's something going on there. The players, and it's been challenging because the lineups, it's been a struggle to get consistency in selection as well because of injuries and selections.
Yeah, I think the frustration is twofold. I think, to Alan there's point, what's the attacking footprint? What's the plan? What the blueprint? Sorry, what's the plan? How do Edinburgh want to be as a team? Now, we're obviously lucky that in the press box we sit in front of the home coaches box, so we can hear a lot of what the Edinburgh coaches are saying, and a lot of it at the weekend was tempo. So it was quick lineouts, it was quick taps, and there was a wee bit of frustration, I think, that Holly Davidson maybe didn't let them away a couple of times. That Ben Vellicott got called back, but I think with Glasgow, you can see a style. Glasgow are hard to beat. They've got a good pack. They can so their back line is up there with any, but they can also grind teams down, as they did against Sale, as they did to a degree against Toulouse, and they can compete with the best teams when they're on it. I think for me, after such a no-show at Hampden, I expected more from Edinburgh. I expected like a bit of a reaction, and we've seen it so many times. Edinburgh on the road, their away form's poor. They come back to the Hive, and that guy with the mic G's all the crowd up, and it all just it all builds, and it's tight, and it's, the fans get involved, and there was none of that, literally none of that. And I think a few people on social media have noticed your absence from the announcing duties, which I'm sure you've not missed. But look,
do you know one of the things that surprised, talking about attack, one of the things that surprised me about Edinburgh, now I spoke to Matt Curry before the Toulon game, and I said to him, do you think if we get a penalty early on, we'll take 3? And he said, yeah, it's a big game. It's against Toulon. I think we will. And they didn't. They kicked for touch, and Cammy kicked well that night. Cammy Scott, I think that was possibly one of his best games for Edinburgh that night. And they kicked for touch, and they went for catch and drive lineouts. I thought when they got that penalty, I wasn't expecting them to go for goal. I thought Cammy's going to nudge this onto the main stand side touchline. They're going to try and catch and drive and get 7. And I was kind of surprised at that. And I don't know whose decision that was, if that was an on-field decision or if that was coaches had said, we'll take the 3. I don't know. That was a bit of an eye-opener for me. Let's keep the, and I've been that coach that said, keep the scoreboard ticking over. If we get the chance, take the 3 and then we go again. But Edinburgh have backed themselves with their driven line out.
Yeah.
And I don't know where, I don't know why that was different on Saturday. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but when you've got Ben Vellicott at scrum half, I think plan A has to be, let's go. Let's tap and go. If the referee blows a whistle, it doesn't matter where the arm is, you tap it and go, and hopefully we get to play. And he's not done it as often as I think maybe he would have, but because the line out had been functioning, I think the desire was let's go for the touchline and keep grinding teams down.
Yeah, I think a lot of that. So there's an element to me of, we'll take the points from in front of the posts, early doors. You can view it 2 ways. To me, in the day that we're in, where teams tend not to kick the points, to me that seems like we know we can't score bucket loads of tries. We want this to be tight. We're going to take every point on offer. Let's make it a bit of an arm wrestle. And I think that's what Edinburgh have tried to do the last 2 years against Glasgow, and it's not really worked. They got lucky last year. It didn't go for them this year. I think, the other side of that is you take the points when they're on offer, as you say, maybe in a 12-point deficit, you build pressure. But I just thought, as you said, did they let them off the hook a bit there? Was that an easy? Would Glasgow be quite happy running back to halfway? So, we've only conceded 3 and we haven't had to defend a driving line out 5 metres from our own line.
Well, I mean, Dobie's first try came from a bit individual. Adam Hastings comes off that left foot gives himself enough space that he can drop the ball into his right foot. And because Edinburgh were pushing really hard, they were quite narrow, and they left Dobie in that space wide. My frustration was more general on Saturday, that there was 38,000 there. It's kind of the show piece. It's the jewel in the crown. Everybody was there. All the high Hegians were there. Sponsors were there. Folk that had been given tickets through the charitable stuff that Edinburgh do were there. There was folk there for their first game, and it just felt like we missed that trick to really get people excited about it.
Yeah.
Duhan and Bohan not making it, and that news coming quite late, to not see those two is tough, and fair play to Mikey Jones. I don't know how much notice they had compared to the press and supporters being told. I don't know how early Duhan and Bohan were aware they weren't going to be playing. Mikey Jones comes in, Jerry Blythe-Latfrey, delighted for him to get his first game and to come on with his brother. Is it's a really cool thing. Not the fairy tale by any stretch. Lewis Wells, another, I've got a lot of time for Lewis. Great kid, Linlithgow boy, family still help at the club. He's still around the club, gets his chance for Duhan. And Lewis Wells has played well when he's been in this year, and then gets crocked.
I think I said to you a couple of weeks ago, I think we're almost at the point of saying, actually, does Lewis Wells deserve a goal? Because Duhan looks so short of any sort of confidence that actually, do you need to take him out the team and just give him a break? Because a few weeks ago, I spoke to Sean and he said, look, we want to give Duhan a run, and we think that continuity of selection can help him. And
yeah, I agree.
It hasn't worked. So are you now at the stage of saying, actually, let's give him a rest? A few comments. This one I quite like because it's too turned into sausage rolls.
All right, Adam.
So I hope you enjoyed your sausage rolls.
Is that my wife in disguise?
Edinburgh's key issue is a continuous cycle of poor recruitment and not expensive players not delivering. Again, I think that points to, with hindsight, and hindsight's great, obviously, but the re-signing of Duhan looks a wild decision. For all his world-class game-breaking ability on his day, has that been money that Edinburgh have spent wisely? The depth is poor and recruitment needs to deliver. I think...
But you don't, and that can only be judged, Ross, with hindsight. The Duhan one is a bit like Tom Jordan, Finn Russell, Stuart Hogg, Blair Kinghorn, Jamie Ritchie. That I really like that Glasgow and Edinburgh produce players that France and England want, and they can go away and perform, because what it does is it frees up a slot for somebody else. So if you look at the back row, Luke Crosby's crocked, Connor Boyle's crocked or on his way back, Hamish Watson. There's so many players who can't get a shirt because there's no shirt for them to have. Freddie Douglas has been getting a shot. Has he been rushed because of necessity, because of injury, or is he? I don't know if he's better because he's not really had the competition. When Jamie left, that I thought it was a great move for Jamie personally, but also a great move for Edinburgh because it freed up another shirt for somebody to come and have a crack at. And that's where the frustration with Dobie across in Glasgow is, that George Horn's playing at 9, so Dobie has to play on the ding-a-ling. When Kyle Rowe comes back, what happens? When Shuggy comes back, what happens to Stafford McDowell? So we've got depth in certain players in certain positions, Ross, but I don't know how you can use the depth. And then players not delivering. Yeah, but that's probably the report card for Scotland in 2025, because as a national team, I don't think we can say we've delivered.
Yeah, and I think, we talk about, we've done the review of on the game. If you talk about as a whole, 2025, Edinburgh's sort of whole calendar year can be summed up with one word: inconsistent. And
Because
it's coming.
Toulon was unreal,
Toulon was brilliant. Toulon,
absolutely unreal.
the first, but again, it's that it happens within games. The first, and people will forgive me if I forget the timings, but the first 40 odd minutes against the Bulls in the quarter final in Pretoria were brilliant. Then Edinburgh, were nowhere for half an hour. There was games in the run of and Sean will point to, well, I reached a Challenge Cup semi-final and they got absolutely blown away by Bath, and they were good in the
Bath, who
quarter.
shouldn't have been in that competition.
Yes, exactly. Bath, who should have done better in the Champions Cup. They did well in the quarter final against the Bulls at the Hive, but again, the performances in that competition weren't at the same level every week. The URC form was so poor that, particularly away from home, that Edinburgh really relied on those reactionary performances to sneak into the playoffs. And they got a couple of away wins towards the end of the season, and they beat Connacht, who'd nothing to play for, and Ulster, who were on the beach, to get in. Now we're in. Asked Sean after the game on Saturday, are we in the same territory again? And he said yes. So here we are again with half of the season still to go. Edinburgh face an uphill battle to get in the playoffs. They're bottom of the Champions Cup pool because they took a second string team to cast, and I understand the reasons for that, but that means that they've got to win this game against Gloucester. So to give themselves a chance and then hope, that the results go their way and they don't need anything against Bath. Again, we don't know anything about Sean's future. As far as I'm led to believe, Sean doesn't know anything about Sean's future. His contract runs out in the summer. You would think 29th of December, we would have had some movement on that if the outcome was going to be positive. Alex Williamson said they were in discussions when we last spoke to him at the AGM. We know nothing further beyond that. So there's a lot of questions to be answered around Edinburgh Rugby.
I would be surprised. These things, it's like when a signing's announced. It's not been done that day. It's just when social media decides. I think Thomas Williams was announced as going to Saracens on Christmas Day
announcement.
I'm pretty sure that was done before we started opening advent calendar doors. So I'd be surprised. I think one of the comments that a couple of Edinburgh players made to me was that they'd enjoyed the summer because it was continuity. It was the first sort of pre-season summer where there'd been continuity in the coaching team. Now that's good to hear. And you got guys like Liam McConnell. So talking, Ross, about depth and recruitment, I like recruitment being within these boundaries. Hope I didn't sound too much like Nigel Farage there, but I like the recruitment to be there. Liam McConnell has been phenomenal. I spoke to him on Saturday after the game. There's somebody that's playing probably beyond what the expectation was for him this year. Ollie Blythe-Lafferty, he's a 40-minute player at the moment, but that's fine because as a prop, we hope he's still got another 15 years in him.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if he's WP&L, he's got another 25 years in him.
Yeah, I was just going to say there, you look at Liam McConnell and think he probably wasn't the guy that you and I had penciled in to take over from Jamie Ritchie. You think of Crosby and Muncaster and guys like that who are ahead of him probably on a
who are the unluckiest men in the world with injuries. Yeah, they make Hugh Jones and Xander look like 100%ers.
Iron men. Yeah, I mean, but there are guys who, there's a guy in Liam who's taking his chance. And now you actually look at it and say, I find it difficult to see where anybody gets in front of him. And I think you're right. You see the depth. If we talk about Glasgow, the depth that Franco's built at Scotstoun with the likes of the Gregor Hiddlestons and the Ewan Ferries, Alex Samuel, Max Williamson, Ben Afshar. These guys aren't guys who get games every week. But when they do, as I've said loads of times before, when they do, they generally do all right. And that's underplaying it. So I think that's what Edinburgh need. They need their senior players to deliver a level much more consistently than they do, that allows the young players to come in and actually challenges them to say, we need you to be at this level. You don't get away with a 5 out of 10 because 3 guys around you are also having a 5 out of 10. You won't get another chance if you have that, because everybody else is at 7.5 or 8.5 out of 10. And that's probably the frustration from Edinburgh. I think Glasgow will take a lot from the last month, because they've shown
after that Saracens game where everybody just went, what on earth has just happened there?
Scarlets.
What did I say?
You said Saracens, which threw me completely.
Sorry, the Scarlets game, for Glasgow not to score a point.
Yeah, I mean,
against anybody, but against Scarlets, where the week before you and I had been saying we'll be sitting here next week talking about 2 bonus point wins for both teams against what we thought were poor Welsh sides. Glasgow got a total freak result, we think.
Yeah, and I think you saw they lost to Ospreys last season at home, and that will give them one, and if they had that was their shocker from last year. That Scarlets game, I nearly called them Saracens as well. That Scarlets game has to be the shocker of this season, and Glasgow now must build on what they've done in the last 4 weeks. They're in a great position in Europe. They've got 2 tough games. They've got Clermont and then Sarries coming up, which are obviously massive games. I can't wait to see what Scotstoun is like for Saracens visiting. I'm sure the Warrior Nation will get right on Owen Farrell's back, but in a good way, in a way that you'd expect of a big European game at Scotstoun, in a way you'd expect of going away anywhere in Europe if you're Sarries.
And Sarries bring us support, and I'm keen to see what Gloucester bring to the Hive, because Gloucester have a really passionate support, even though they're having an absolute stinker. I see the Silver Fox, it's the CEO at Gloucester's, put out a letter to the fan base today, sort of saying, stick with us, we're working on it. There's things going on behind the scenes. They've been pretty open about their recruitment, trying to make people say, it's going to be okay next year, just stick with us. But Gloucester will come up. I was actually messaging somebody for Gloucester today after making all my new pals at the 745 game about coming up, and they'll bring us support to then go to Bath the next week. I think there's quite a few Edinburgh supporters will enjoy that trip for, seeing Edinburgh away, but seeing what Finn and Cam Redpath and your pal Josh Bayliss that you love to talk about, and we've not actually mentioned that's the longest you've gone on a pod without mentioning Josh Bayliss.
He had a stinker at the weekend. He dropped an inside ball, or sort of didn't do enough to gather an inside ball, and then Northampton ran the length, and the whole thing finished ironically with Henry Pollock doing the VAR celebration. I mean, get that in the bin. Rugby players with football celebrations is just for my room 101.
He did an interview, I think, with the Times, and he said, "I would hate me." Or I would boo me, I think is what he said, and I quite like that. While I'm totally against booing, I did think at least he's showing a bit of awareness. Alan's back again. I don't know. I don't know. I think over the course of the season, if Glasgow finish in the top 4 and potentially the top 2, all these things are forgotten.
But to Alan's point, I think if that game is the difference between Glasgow finishing 2nd or 4th, they'll say, "Yeah, we've dropped the ball there," because
no, totally.
They know how important a home run in the playoffs is. However, what I would say, and we probably want to wrap up or we could be here all evening, is
there's nothing on the telly tonight.
Well, let's just keep going. How good is it that we're sitting here already, turn of the year, and we're pretty confident that Glasgow will be in the playoffs again? I think, at the start of the season, never mind the start of the year, the start of the season, we talked about what would this season look like? Was it going to have to be a bit of a rebuild? Frank had made his feelings clear. He's lost Henko Venter, he's lost Cancellieri, he's lost experience. He was replacing them with young Scottish guys. How would it all go? But so far, so good. On the whole, Scarlet's game aside, and we'll give them their one. But how good is it that Glasgow? We're pretty confident Glasgow will be in the shake-up for top 2, top 4 come the end of the season.
Yeah, I think so, and it there's a lot to look forward to in 2026, but I'm beginning to wonder if it is the blind Scottish rugby faith that keeps you looking at that, because there's been so many, was it Gloria Estefan, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It's just this year has felt that with every positive thing that's happened, there's been another that you've just been waiting for next week, and I would love to get rid of that. I think you mentioned about Edinburgh, but I think it's probably across the board the lack of consistency has been a real. It's the bugbear. It's the bit that falls in between the cracks that we end up talking about for an hour a week. It would be great to just be spouting the same thing: another win, another great performance, rotation of squad because he didn't play well, but there's somebody coming in. The injuries that players are suffering does worry me, and I think the saving grace at the moment is that the Welsh game's in such disarray that we're actually all right.
Yes, I think that's. I think Look, I mean, I don't.
It's a bit Homer Simpson in that there's always going to be a million people better than you, but yeah, and I don't take any pleasure in that. I don't know what it's going to take. I don't have, and we're not seeing what's going on. Cam Henderson scored at the weekend, I think. He's a player that we were surprised wasn't in the autumn test squad, and then but the depth in those positions is pretty good. And I wonder if Cam Henderson is the kind of player that's looking at, is he coming back up the road at some point in the next season and a bit?
Yeah, so just on that, where a comment earlier, and I forgot to flash it up at the time, but somebody was saying, one of Edinburgh's problems has been they've recruited poorly. And Ewan Johnson in France, is he a guy that might be on the radar of Scottish rugby? I mean, undoubtedly he's on the radar because he's a player of national interest. So you hope. We talk all the time about guys going, like Jamie Ritchie was an example you used earlier, going away. Tom Jordan's gone away. So we've given opportunities to youngsters or to other people who've either taken them or there's maybe a gap still to fill. What I'd like to see more of is players who are now in that international setup. Will Hurd is another one, really struggling to get a game at Leicester on a consistent basis. And okay, Edinburgh might be sort of throwing their lot in with Ollie Blythe Lafferty, but Scottish rugby surely can have a look at somebody like that and do their level best to get him up the road. Cam Henderson's another one. Ewan Johnson, the same.
Alex Callum scored for Newcastle the weekend.
Yeah. Alex Masibaka in France has looked pretty good for Montpellier after spending last season in Pro D2. So there are guys out there who could come back and add to the environment that is Edinburgh or Glasgow. They maybe plug the gap of experience. Cam Henderson's not got huge amounts of caps, but he's been at Leicester for this will be nearly 6 years. So he's a guy who's been in that kind of setup. And you look when Edinburgh eventually have to plan for life post Grant Gilchrist, he's a guy that would be perfect to come in and step in. Would Cam Redpath go up a level in the Scotland selectors' minds if he was playing every week for Edinburgh? Would that help a young Cammy Scott develop as a 10? So there's loads to it, obviously, and that's a small part of it. But I do wish, and I wish we heard more about that. I think that's an area where both pro teams and Scottish Rugby as a whole could be more open. Without saying we are going after this player, there could be a degree of, we want guys who are in the Scotland picture, if you like, to be playing in Scotland. Every other country seems to want that. Scotland seem to want to push players away, and in circumstances, I'm for that. But yeah, I'm ranting and raving now. But you get my point. That.
But so put your big boy pants on at your next press conference. Who's in charge of that? Who's doing the recruitment? So is it David Nucifora and Gregor Townsend that say we need these guys back in so we can look after them and manage them and see if they've got it? Because being at Leicester or Newcastle or Montpellier or wherever it is, they're too detached from us, and we can't look at them against America and Tonga and Portugal. And
yeah, no, you're right, and I think when you see, when we speak to these people, and David Nucifora obviously has a say on stuff like that, but again, so much of it is devolved to the pro team coaches. But I'd be interested to know how much sway they have and how much influence Murrayfield, as in Gregor and Nucifora, have on these matters, and how it differs between Edinburgh and Sean Everett, and how do they recruit for next season without knowing if Sean's still going to be there? And then Glasgow, where Franco's just signed a long-term contract, and without being disparaging to either coach, Franco seems like a guy who would stand up for himself and say to David Nucifora, no, actually, I'm not going to sign this guy just because he's Scottish. I want Henkel Venter back, as an example. But yeah, look, I think if we sort of sum up, I think there's a lot to look forward to. I'm not necessarily sure we're looking forward to a lot of it with a lot of expectation. I think it's that sort of old, it's the hope that kills you. It's definitely the hope that makes us look forward to things like the Six Nations and the end of the season with Edinburgh and Glasgow and all that comes with that. But is there a load of expectation there? I'm not sure.
I'm not so sure you summed that up.
No, I probably didn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm worried for the second.
No, I know. It's why we keep tuning in, though. It's why 38,000 folk turned up, because they thought there's going to be something from last week to this week where we're at Murrayfield. We're going to get, both teams have got interesting games this weekend, and then they go into Europe.
Yeah, and these are other games that could be dodgy games, because you look at the last month for both teams and think back-to-back European games, then the derbies. Like, those are the games surely that are as easy as any for the coaches and the players to make sure they're ready. And over the last 2 weeks, I'm not really sure we've seen that. Glasgow have a bit of a skip in their step because they've won the trophy and they've got 9 points out of 10 without playing that well. Edinburgh might be pretty flat, but like, Edinburgh need to win this week, and the record in Italy is not good, and all of a sudden that becomes must win. Otherwise, you could have taken no points from 15 in the league, and that's just not acceptable. Similarly, Glasgow are at home to Zebre. They'll expect to win that. I expect Franco to make a lot of changes.
Yeah. Be interested to see where Jamie Dobie plays.
Yeah, I actually wondered if Jamie Dobie plays, because he could sit on the bench. But I just thought, is this a perfect game for somebody like Ben Afshar, who's been sort of clicking his heels, waiting for a chance, and then on the bench, I thought, young Jack Oliver's been there a while. He's played for Munster. Why not? He's the kind of guy that you could probably give a run in that situation. So I'll be really interested. I'm really interested.
There'd be a lot of very proud folk in Hawick if Jack Oliver got a game.
100% there would, and rightly so. And I think, I hope 2026 is the year of a lot of proud Tripilotus when all three of them finally make it on the field. Not necessarily together for Scotland, but I think, Tavi apparently is not that far away from being fit. Mosese, we think, is about a month away. So hopefully they are on that road, and then sort of is back to the point of Edinburgh. Hopefully Edinburgh can get a few bodies back from injury this week because they'll need them. But going into those European games,
the injury list is enormous. Before we go, what's your 2025 rugby highlight?
I knew you would ask me that. I think it's a really interesting one.
Thank you. It's not my first rodeo.
Yeah. Do you know what? I probably picked two. I think seeing all those Scottish guys play for the Lions would be one. That's kind of the obvious one that immediately springs to mind. I think from a sort of personal point of view, speaking to the Glasgow guys who'd been picked, so Sione, Hughes, Scott Cummings, and then at that time Xander at Scotstoun, probably half an hour after they had the news, was pretty cool. I remember after we spoke to Sione, we made our way back to the press room, which is the back of the stand in Scotstoun, and then maybe 5 minutes after we'd finished with Sione, he was on the phone to his family. So you have that opportunity to speak to them so soon, and it's so raw, and you could see exactly what it meant, and the sort of clips of the reaction are on our YouTube page for people to watch. I thought that was pretty cool. I think the other highlight would have to be two. So I'm going to pick three. Scotland beating Wales in the Women's World Cup. I think because that was, you kind of saw elements of that whole 80-minute performance, and then it all just clicked in the one day, and they were virtually unplayable. I don't think many teams, certainly Six Nations teams, would have beaten Scotland that day. And then the last one would be the second half of Glasgow Toulouse, which was as good as I've ever seen Glasgow in any guise, and was as sort of raucous as I've ever heard Scotstoun. At half time, I spoke to Mark Palmer from the Times and Tom English from the BBC, and we were talking about that this could be a sore one. This could be any margin. And then there was a sort of look across the press box at full time, and we were like, "What? What have we just watched?" So yeah, those three probably. But if I was to pick one, I think probably the Women's World Cup performance, because we knew what that meant as well. We knew that it almost guaranteed the quarterfinal.
Yeah. No,
what would you pick?
Oh, mine are all selfish. Mine are all very selfish. Being at Kingsholm for the 7-4-5 game was pretty spectacular. Still puts the hairs in the back of my neck up. That was special. I think domestically, that weekend of Glasgow, Toulouse, Edinburgh, Toulon was, neither of us predicted that. I certainly didn't see any of that coming. Both of them surprised me. The first 10 minutes, I thought Toulon are going to take 50 here, and at half time you're thinking this is going to be 50 for Toulouse and for both teams to win, and it felt like atmospheres at both were outstanding. For Scotland, I found it difficult. I wasn't actually at many, but my buddy works for the All Blacks, being in the stadium, but then when the energy just got sucked out of the stadium, when we knew we were that was like I was saying earlier in the pod, I've been at some strange atmospheres this year, and that was a strange It was almost like when the referee blew the whistle, there was like it wasn't a stunned silence, but there was hardly a cheer. There wasn't an applause. It was just everybody kind of went. It was just a really weird finish to a game. And I just the women's stuff, seeing them at the Hive and the Six Nations was great. The World Cup, the whole energy around the Women's World Cup, selfishly me getting to go and meet Ilona Maher was pretty cool. Um, there's been so many highs this year, but I've also found it tough with some of the lows. Have made me feel a bit sad.
Do you know the one that I'm amazed if you're going off the sort of the things that we've got to do this year, the one I'm amazed hasn't made it on that list is when we met each other at Murrayfield the day before the All Blacks game, and I've brutally rejected your phone call whilst speaking to Ardy Savia, and turned around to see Bruce standing in the stands with his good pals Sir John Kirwan and Sir Sean Fitzpatrick, all hugs and smiles. And I thought, when I asked you, I thought, yeah, when he says selfish, that's definitely got to be top three. And the All Black Knights have not made it onto your list.
Do you know
brutally snubbed?
Do you know the John Kirwan one? So there's a podcast he did with a guy whose name I forget. It was on, I think it was a BBC one. What's it called? The final score was, or don't tell me the score. It's called. I forget the guy that does it. And I've listened to John Kirwan on there half a dozen times. It's excellent. He talks about mental health. He talks about his journey. He talks loads of good stuff in it. And a couple of years ago, when I was giving my Doddy champion cap at the Doddy dinner, John Kirwan was there as the special guest, and I met him and I had a chat to him. And then I met him at Murrayfield at the captain's run this year, and he remembered me. And I was like, that is absolute class. That is just such an amazing thing that I'm not sure you get everywhere. And I'm not always great at remembering folk that I've met. And I thought, wow, that's pretty special. And I love chatting to him. And the other funny thing was that I was with Roddy Deans, who is possibly the best looking human on the planet. And when he introduced himself to Sean Fitzpatrick and John Kirwan, they were both amazed that he was Colin's son. Which I thought was class. It's an amazing game, and I wrote about that today. I put a post up on my social media saying, like, we can't control the results. We're not the coaches, we're not the players, but there's so many good folk involved. And Saturday, I got a big kick out of seeing, like, I had these two kids just made me feel 10 feet tall. They came up and they wanted me to announce them scoring tries. So they told me their name and they ran in the Thistle suite and touched the ball-doon, and then I gave them the big announcement that they scored tries. You should have seen them. They were so happy, and I was like, this is magic. Like, they couldn't have cared less what the score was or how good the game was. They were just having a grand old time with a ball under their arm. And that's what it kind of felt like, Glasgow against Edinburgh. It was like a clubhouse that you and I remember.
Yep.
Because yeah, the enemies, but actually pals as well. It was what it was. Listen, pal, it's been a great year. I really appreciate it. I love these catch ups and blethers. I don't know who tunes in. My pal John the Bruce in Hong Kong will be going through it with a fine tooth comb tomorrow. When he wakes up. But a final, go for it.
Just before we sign off for the year, if Cammy Little is watching, sort me out, Cammy. I've been absolutely stitched up there, so sort me out.
When I went down for the dinner, he gave me a bag of sausage rolls. He gave me tray bake. He gave me all sorts. A tatty scones. Nicky loves a tatty scones. So we had a bit of tatty scone the day after. Some boy. Yeah, I would apologise, but I didn't feel any guilt. I had 4 sausage rolls, and every one of them was magic. Every one of them was magic. So we're not. This podcast is not brought to you by Little's Bakery in Moffat. It is actually brought to you by S1 Jobs. The Scotland Rugby News podcast has been brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then you can head over to s1jobs.com right now and upload your CV. There are thousands of jobs all across Scotland, and you can find the one for you in 2026 at S1 Jobs. So go on, kick off your search now. Big fella, been great to see you. Have a wonderful new year. Let's talk more in 2026.
See you next week.